How to tell a story in a presentation. Have you ever listened to a speaker and you're just sitting there yawning like, have they ever told this story before? Or I don't know if I can sit through this all the way. When you see somebody present and they have practiced their story, they tell it as if it's the first time it's happened and they're excited to tell you, but equally it's well rehearsed. There's so many pieces to this that are important. I'm excited to teach you about this because I've been speaking for many, many years. I'm in the Hall of Fame of speaking, actually. And so thanks for joining me today. We're going to help you get those stories to a great place. There's something really special about a great story, isn't there? When somebody comes to the stage and we hear them and they're prepared and they feel like, oh, I want to listen to this person. I could sit around the campfire with them or we could talk on the porch. That is a great storyteller. You can be the same. Here's some cool tricks and ideas for you. Number one is to understand the anatomy of a compelling story. Think about a story that you really love. Think about if you're mostly into movies, they all come from books, right? It's a story. But there's a character, or many of them. There's a plot, there's a narrative, there's a reason, there's usually a problem, and then there's a resolution, a solution. There's all kinds of pieces that create the anatomy of a great story. And when somebody gives that story to you in a way that you go, oh wow, you just took me on a beautiful journey, they appreciate you so much more as a speaker. The greatest storytellers are not only the most effective speakers, but the highest paid as well. I'd recommend that finding your story within is the best place to go for stories. Obviously, you can think about movies you've seen or books you've read, examples you've found online. You could go hunt through the news and use examples, but finding your story within is absolutely the best place. That's the reason that you are there to speak. To be a great storyteller and to tell your story well is so important. But finding the story within, I think it comes down to capturing moments when they happen. In other words, keep a journal with you. Write down your ideas as they come. When a story happens, remember it, either by taking a picture of something that'll trigger that memory, but I truly, honestly have to tell you, if you'll write it out as close to as it felt when it happened, then the energy of every time you tell it back again will always be there. The greatest stories that have ever happened in my career as a speaker that I share on stage are the ones that I captured on camera when they happened, whether it was with a person or a place, and then I went back and I wrote either a blog about it or I wrote about it in my journal. So don't neglect that practice. I would also suggest brainstorming with other people about stories that you could use. In other words, how you do this is to say, what if I wanted to talk about this subject? So if you're like me, you attend religion in a church. At the church, they'll give you a topic to speak on. So then what I do when I get a topic, they might say, let's talk about joy for this example. Then I'm going to start to fill it in with examples of joy in my life. Whether that's the story of my son and I walking on the beach, or a time where I felt great joy because I was in love with my wife. Those types of things are great stories. And so as you start to mine those stories out, it's because you've established a foothold upon them and you can say, this is what I'm going to talk about, this word or this theme, and then I'm going to add the story to it. A lot of my best stories actually come from a place of extreme vulnerability. For example, in 2020, when I lost all my work because I'm a speaker on stages around the world and all of a sudden it's all shut down. You lived through it too. But here's what happened. I remember walking down the street, and every night I would walk and I would listen to my thoughts, but I'd also listen to my headphones and try to work through how I could make it through this time in my life. One night I found myself walking and I realized I had come to the end of my neighborhood, and it's a huge community. I mean, it's almost like I walked an entire city and it was cold. It was March 2020. And I remember it was dark and it was silent all around me. I heard the sound of a dog. Arr, arr, arr. It was barking. And I looked around and there were no homes anywhere. All there was curbing and new foundations of homes that would be built eventually. I followed the barking as it got louder and louder to a window well that was not yet filled in. It was about 6 feet deep. And there was a little dog, a pug, that was leaning up, trying to get out of the window well and going, help, help, bark, bark. It was barking for somebody to help. And I looked around and I saw no owner of this dog, and I was alone and feeling sorry for myself. And so, because I had lost all my work, right? So I saw this little pug, and I climbed down into the window well and I helped him out. And he actually waited for me when I climbed back out, and he gave me a hug, and like he was saying, thank you, thank you. Then he ran off and went wherever he went, back to his house, hopefully. But I share this story now as one of my most famous stories about talking about the fact that when the pandemic hit, I was called a non-essential worker. And eventually I started to feel like a non-essential person. It wasn't until that pug was a gift to me to bark and say, hey, somebody needs you, and maybe it's just a dog in a window well. Here's the thing. That story I could have easily never shared, but it profoundly impacted the way that I viewed my ability to now go back home and say, I do need to keep working, I need to keep trying, and I need to keep my ears open and listen for those who need my help. Now, did you see what I did with that story? It's a very simple one. It's not a perfect story, but it probably took you to that place with that cute little pug. I tell this story in about a 10-minute time frame. I don't have time here, but I want you to know that simple things like that can create an experience for your audience to say, wow, I felt not essential before as well. And you just gave me hope through a dog story. That's kind of cool. I share stories about my son and I going and eating at McDonald's, and how inspiring of a story this becomes because I realized I wasn't fully present with him. I was mostly on my phone. There are ways that we can share vulnerably, but we need to mine those stories out through our lives. And if we don't keep a journal, we don't keep track, we don't try to find the stories that have changed our lives, and we don't write them down, unfortunately, we can't share them. So please put that practice into play for your career. Crafting a memorable opening is extremely important with a story. You want to give the audience a reason to lean in and to listen instead of being on their phone. That's the competition we have as speakers. They have a huge distraction, and that's okay, but we just have to be more interesting as a speaker. So craft a compelling introduction or opening to your speech and really focus on that. The problem is that if you only focus on that, you don't get through the whole story, and so you also need to remember to tie up the loose ends at the end. Building tension and engagement is also important. I do that with the dog story, just in the sense of saying things like, I wasn't essential, and people didn't think I was essential in my work anymore, so how am I essential in my life? Those types of things create a tension or a discord for the audience to think, I've felt something like that too. And then I create the resolution by saying, there was a dog who was a gift from heaven to be able to help me realize I'm still essential to someone. Leveraging visuals and multimedia is really important. And you can be on stage and tell a story with nothing to prove in terms of visuals or images or stories through a camera. But I can tell you this, when I've told some of my stories, which seem quite outlandish, like the dog story, I don't have a picture of that pug because I didn't think it was going to be something I would share. Instead, I just found a non-copyright version of a pug that I show as a picture, and everybody smiles. But then there are stories from my real life that people have said to me through the years, this can't be real, it's too fantastic of a story. And so now I show a picture of the person who influenced my life or where I was when it happened. Those types of things are helpful. And if you don't have that for the big story you're about to share, what's cool is nowadays you can create it through ChatGPT, AI, lots of cool tools in order to supplement or support your imagery as well as the story. Adding depth through character development is really an important piece of a story when it matters. A lot of speakers give way too many details. So I say, keep the character development short unless it's absolutely necessary. For example, I talk about my teacher in school who discovered me singing in the hall. She's from Wales, and she has an accent when she speaks, and so she sounds like this. All the character development I do for her is say, who's singing in the hall? Her name was Mrs. Hall. She was from Wales, so she had an accent. Who's singing in the hall? She had made a promise to herself that if she heard someone singing in the hall, she would discover them. That's all the character development I have time for in that story. But consider for the audience what they need to hear in order to be ready to consume your story and be excited about that character and cheering them on. Embracing vulnerability and authenticity is one of my hallmarks and signature moves. I share a lot about being out of shape or having a dad bod or making a mistake with my kids or not being present because I'm distracted on my phone. Those types of things are so relatable that the audience loves it. That's authenticity. That's vulnerability. Unfortunately, a lot of speakers think I have to appear perfect. I can't ever stumble on a word. To me, candidly, I like to stumble over the words a little bit because it feels like I'm telling it for the first time. I'm reliving it. And if it's vulnerable, I'll even start crying if it's called for. If the emotion hits me because I'm reliving that, there's something really special about being vulnerable. And a lot of speakers that lean into that are the highest paid and the most effective. Delivering a compelling conclusion is so important because if you work so hard at the opener and then you have the great body of this story and then you don't have a compelling close, the story can fall flat, even if it was awesome and then all of a sudden, it just ended. You've seen stories like that. Maybe you've watched a movie like it or been at a party with somebody who didn't have quite the punchline to the closing piece. And you're like, well, kind of left us all hanging. You don't want to do that. You need to tie up the ribbon and make it so that everybody goes, oh, I love that ending. It can either be something funny, emotional, it drives you to do something even better with your life, but the story has to have a point and you tag that on the very end. Finally, I would suggest practicing and refining your storytelling skills. How and when can you do this outside of being on stage? Easy, everywhere. Honestly, the other day I was in an Uber and I was talking to the guy and the next thing I knew, I thought, I could share this story and it's like practicing for stage. So I just shared this story and he was laughing and he goes, you should tell that on stage. Little did he know I was going to. I was practicing on it. And so you can do that in any conversation with friends. I'll do that when I meet people on an airplane, in the Uber, wherever it might be, if I want to practice this skill. You can also go online. You could do a live stream, as they call it. You could record a video of yourself practicing. You could have a family night with your children and sit them all around and practice the stories with them. Every opportunity to speak, every chance to tell the story. Give the points, give the funny lines, give the character development, give the quotables, and then wrap it all up into a nice conclusion. Even little children, they'll give you great feedback. Actually, they might be the best audience because they won't let you get away with a bad story. And so what I'd like for you to do is you become a greater speaker for the stage, but also in your life. If you'll go into the comments, I would love for you to share with me your favorite storytellers. You know, I didn't quite share some of mine with you, but I can tell you, Abraham Lincoln has some of the best storytelling I've ever heard in my life, as well as, I love so much Stephen Covey. He's one of the best storytellers there is. And then, who are yours? Who are some of your favorites? Please put it in the comments so that I can look them up too. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you'll like and subscribe. Thanks for joining me today. Excited to hear your next story.